What makes someone follow a killer? Not out of fear, but out of devotion. Charles Manson never pulled a trigger. He didn't have to, because by the time the murders happened, he already owned their minds. This is the psychology of manipulation and the cult that changed everything.
The wind howls over the California desert. A rusted bus lies half buried in sand. Nearby, the remnants of an old ranch rot beneath a scorching sun, the last traces of a world that once bowed to a single man. His name still sparks fear, fascination, and denial. Charles Manson, a failed musician, a petty criminal, but somehow a prophet to the lost. In the summer of 1969, the peace and love movement twisted into something monstrous. And standing at the center of the storm was a man who never pulled the trigger, never wielded a knife, yet still controlled the blood that spilled. This is not just the story of a cult. It's the anatomy of manipulation, and how one broken mind infected dozens. Welcome. Inside the mind of Charles Manson. Charles Mills Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was just 16. She was an alcoholic, a runaway. Some say she once sold her son for a pitcher of beer. Charles never knew his real father. His stepfather beat him, and by the age of 9 he was already stealing, not out of rebellion, but hunger. By 13, he'd been sent to reform school. There, he was beaten, abused. Every time he was released, he returned with sharper eyes, a quieter voice. He wasn't growing stronger. He was learning how to survive. He called prison home, and that's not a metaphor. By the time most young men were starting families, Charles had spent more time locked up than free. But inside those walls, something happened. He read psychology books. He studied the art of manipulation. He learned how pimps controlled women, how cults formed, and he began to see something. In a world full of loneliness, if you gave someone purpose, no matter how insane, they would follow you. All you had to do was believe it first. In 1967, the gates opened. Charles Manson walked out of prison with a guitar in one hand and a philosophy that would soon lead to death. He didn't preach fear, not at first. He offered freedom. He told the broken kids of Haight-Ashbury that society had lied to them, that money was a cage, that love was the answer. But behind the peace talk was a method. Strip them of ego, remove identity, replace it with the family. Manson wasn't building followers. He was deleting people and uploading himself in their place. He used LSD like a scalpel, cutting through consciousness until his voice was the only thing left. One of the first girls he brought home described it like this. He looked at me and said, "You don't need your name. I'll give you a new one." And I believed him. And so, the family was born, not with a ceremony, not with a plan, just a van, a guitar, and a man who knew how to become anything his followers needed. They called themselves the Manson family, but what they didn't know was that Charles had no intention of being their father. He was preparing them for war. In 1968, a rusty old school bus painted black rolled through California. Inside, young girls with sunken eyes, men with faraway stares, and one man holding a guitar like it was scripture. Charles Manson. He wasn't just talking about peace anymore. He was writing his own gospel. There is no death, he'd say, only transition. The world's about to burn, and we're the chosen ones. And his followers believed. They weren't just runaways and dropouts. They were searchers, hungry, and Manson fed them exactly what they needed: a place, a purpose, and a messiah. In the hills near Los Angeles, they found their temple, Spawn Ranch, a decaying old movie set forgotten by time. There were no rules, no clocks, just drugs, music, and Charlie. He spoke in riddles. He laughed when nothing was funny. He stared through people, not at them, and slowly, the line between reality and delusion began to dissolve. One girl gave up her child to follow him. Another carved an X into her forehead. When parents came looking, the family would greet them with smiles. But Manson made sure the message was clear. Your daughter belongs to the earth now. LSD was a tool. Sex was currency. Every experience was part of his rewiring. On acid trips, he'd ask them to imagine him as Christ, or the devil, or both. And by the time the trip ended, they weren't sure what was real anymore. Manson would strip them naked, humiliate them, then hug them and call them beautiful. Confuse, break, rebuild. That was his system. He didn't want followers. He wanted extensions of himself, mirrors, puppets. They thought they were free, but they were shackled by love. Not romantic love, not spiritual love, a weaponized love, the kind that makes you die for someone, or worse, kill for them. It started with a song, Helter Skelter, by the Beatles. To most it was just noise, Paul McCartney screaming about a slide, but to Manson it was a message, a prophecy hidden in guitar distortion, a call to war. He played the White Album on loop at Spawn Ranch, convinced the Beatles were speaking directly to him. He told his family,
Black people will rise up and kill all the whites, but they don't know how to lead. That's where we come in. We'll wait in the desert until it's over, then return and rule the world.
He called it Helter Skelter, not just a race war, not just chaos. The end of the old world, the birth of a new one, with him as God. He wasn't just telling stories anymore. He was preparing for battle. The girls buried knives in the dirt. The men practiced disappearing into the hills. He even picked their hiding place, the bottomless pit, a cave in Death Valley where they'd wait out the war. He showed them maps, drew symbols, told them God had marked him with X eyes and angel hair. LSD-fueled sermons turned into military briefings. He trained them to obey without question. When Helter Skelter begins, he'd say, we don't run from it. We ignite it. The prophecy was no longer theory. It was a mission. In secret, Manson told Tex Watson, it's time. We'll start Helter Skelter ourselves. They needed a trigger, a spark, a murder, something to terrify the world into collapse. He pointed to a house on Cielo Drive. Go there, he said. Do something witchy. Tex didn't ask why. He didn't need to. The family was no longer a commune. It was a weapon, and it was about to explode. On August 8th, 1969, the family came down from the hills, and the world would never be the same. August 8th, 1969. The sun set slowly over Los Angeles, unaware of the storm creeping toward its glittering hills. 4 people climbed into a car that night. Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, all followers of Charles Manson, all under orders. Their destination, 10,050 Cielo Drive, a mansion once owned by music producer Terry Melcher, the man who rejected Manson's music, but Manson didn't care who lived there now. He told them simply,
Go to that house, kill everyone in it.
and so they did. Stephen Parent was just visiting the groundskeeper. He never made it out. Tex shot him 4 times through the window. The first blood spilled, then they moved inside. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was there with her friends, Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist, Abigail Folger, heiress to a coffee fortune, and Wojciech Frykowski, a Polish screenwriter. They were laughing, drinking, and in seconds everything turned to screams. Tex burst in, waving a .22 revolver. "I'm the devil," he said, "and I'm here to do the devil's business." What followed was a frenzy. They tied them up, beat them, stabbed them dozens of times. Jay Sebring was shot and stabbed as he begged them to spare Sharon. Abigail Folger ran, bleeding, into the yard. They caught her and stabbed her 28 times. Frykowski was beaten with a gun and stabbed 51 times. Sharon pleaded for the life of her unborn child. She cried. She begged. But Susan Atkins whispered, "I have no mercy for you." Sharon was stabbed 16 times. Then, Susan used her blood to write one word on the front door. Pig. P-I-G. The next morning, the headlines read like fiction. Pregnant starlet murdered, Hollywood horror, satanic panic. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The next night they killed again. And soon, the name Manson would echo across every screen in America. But Charles wasn't finished. Not yet. August 10th, 1969, just one day after the slaughter on Cielo Drive, Charles Manson woke up calm. In his mind, everything was going to plan. But he wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Helter Skelter needed fuel. More blood, more fear. And this time he wanted to pick the victims himself. So he joined the group: Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten. They drove through L.A. in the night, looking, hunting. Charles Manson tied them up, told them not to worry, that no one would be hurt. Then he left. He gave the real orders to Tex. "Make sure they know this is Helter Skelter," he said. What happened next was worse than before. Leno LaBianca was stabbed with a bayonet. Rosemary tried to run. She was stabbed over 40 times. Then Tex carved the word "war" into Leno's stomach. They left a fork in his chest, a knife in his throat, and on the walls, in blood, "Rise. Death to pigs. Helter Skelter." 2 nights, 9 bodies, no suspects. Los Angeles was paralyzed with fear. Celebrities hired bodyguards. Gun shops sold out. The city locked its doors, and Charles Manson disappeared. He took his family back into the desert, to Spahn Ranch, then further, to Death Valley, waiting for Helter Skelter to start. But instead, cracks began to form. The prophecy hadn't come. The Black Uprising never happened, but blood had been spilled, and the police were closing in. Not because of the murders, but because of a stolen car ring. They had no idea. They were about to capture America's most infamous cult by accident. October 1969, Death Valley, California, a forgotten sunburnt patch of land. This is where it all started to fall apart. Rangers were investigating stolen vehicles, dune buggies, bikes, chopped cars hidden in the brush. They didn't expect to find them. Charles Manson, dirty, rambling, hiding inside a narrow bathroom cabinet, smiling. "I'm just a nothing," he said. But that nothing had led 9 people to a ritualistic death. The authorities still didn't know what they had. Manson was booked on auto theft, that's all. Until Susan Atkins started to talk. She was scared. And in a cold women's jail in L.A., she confessed. To a cellmate, she said, "I was there when they killed Sharon Tate." She begged for her baby's life, the cellmate told the guards. And within hours, detectives had a name: Charles Manson. Manson never killed anyone himself, but his words did, his followers did, and soon America would meet him, in court. But the trial wasn't just about murder, it was about control, about charisma, and the terrifying power of belief. Manson shaved his head, carved a swastika into his forehead, and claimed he was the second coming of Christ. The trial would last months. America watched, horrified, and hypnotized. This wasn't just murder. It was a movement, fueled by acid, fear, and blind obedience. Charles Manson would never walk free again. But even behind bars, he left something behind. An idea, a question. How many more Mansons are out there? And would we even see them coming? Charles Manson was sentenced to death. But in 1972, California abolished the death penalty. So he lived, in a cell, for decades. And every year, someone new wrote him a letter, a fan, a believer. Some of them wanted to marry him. Others just wanted to understand him. But the scariest ones, they wanted to be him. In prison, Manson never changed. He gave interviews, smiled like he knew a secret, said he never killed anyone, claimed we were the real killers for building a world that creates monsters like him. And the truth, maybe we did, because his image, his evil, never really left. It became something else. He inspired movies, music. Marilyn Manson borrowed the name. Quentin Tarantino turned the murders into a film. Even the true crime boom owes part of its DNA to that summer of 1969. But here's the thing. We didn't just remember Manson. We kept him alive in podcasts, in Halloween costumes, in social media memes. A man who convinced others to kill in his name became a brand. Charles Manson died in 2017. He was 83. No one cried. But no one forgot. Because what he did wasn't just about knives and blood. It was about ideas, about control, about what happens when one man decides he's the truth. And the world listens. Even now, his shadow is still out there, whispering in the dark corners of the internet, in the echo chambers of the forgotten, waiting for someone else to follow. There are no more desert communes. Now the family lives on encrypted servers, in comment sections, in coaching groups. Some promise salvation, others promise justice. All they need is your pain, your loneliness, your need to belong. And if you give them that, they'll give you purpose. But that purpose might cost someone else their life. The story of Charles Manson isn't just a true crime case. It's a prophecy. Because what happened once is happening again. Only this time the murders might not be committed with knives. They're done with words, with influence, with belief systems. And we are more vulnerable than ever. The family didn't die in the desert. It just moved online. So if someone tells you they have all the answers, run. Because the next Manson might not have a knife. They'll have a mic and a Wi-Fi connection, and you won't even know you're in the family until it's too late.